well-being, and what concrete mechanisms or platforms are needed to enable young people to meaningfully influence decisions at national and global level in financing? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I also thank very much to you, Madam Permanent Secretary, for your remarks, especially what you said about on how rights of children and youth must not be compromised, even if there is fiscal strain. I really find that point very important to us as young people. I want to start my statement today by talking about why I started in the FfD field. I first started in the FfD field in the tax space, which was an extremely closed space for young people. I was almost the youngest at every single negotiation or committee I attended. And whenever I raised the issue of including young people, especially children in the process, I was often met with sometimes confusion, sometimes surprise, or even pure ignorance at times. And I think this is a pattern because the international financial architecture and the multilateral frameworks that govern financing for development and its nexus processes continue to treat us, young people, and especially children, as beneficiaries of financing, instead of valid rights holders who possess a legitimate role in shaping how these processes should function. I think it is a common fact that it is children and youth who bear the most direct consequences of the increasing financing gap for the SDGs. I think let's first consider the example of education. The obligations that come from sovereign debt force governments into financial austerity, and one of the first budgets to be reduced is education. And this means that we have overcrowded classrooms, fewer teachers, and reduced access for the poorest students. Yet the 21st century economy is demanding young people to be agile, to be digitally native, but the education system is not keeping up with that. And I think the same applies for the question of employment and decent jobs. There's a variety of programs that many governments offer for youth employment, internships and vocational training. But whenever there is fiscal austerity, those are the programs that are cut off very quickly. And that compromises our right as young people to have decent work. And even beyond the question of education and employment, the fiscal deterioration also threatens our right to live in a healthy, safe, and sustainable world. Reduction in finances result in deferred climate financing, underfunded programs for children's health, especially in mental health, and it dismantles existing social protection nets for young people. But often, they seem to be packaged as unfortunate outcomes of fiscal restructuring. But I would actually consider them as cost shifting and responsibility shifting onto the next generation. So, then the second question, what concrete mechanisms do we actually need? I think we need to have a formal, mandated, and youth-led space that guarantees the right of young people to participate in the works of relevant institutions, such as the Bretton Woods institutions, multilateral development banks, and international financial institutions. While I have seen many of these organizations offer avenues for youth participation in the form of youth forums, youth advisory boards, these are not effective modalities for including youth. What we need is a systemic, constituency-like space that actually has a mandate, where young people have the rights to participate in the proceedings of such institutions. I think about examples of how other multilateral organizations achieve these spaces, such as the UNFCCC with Youngo, the UNEP, or the UNCCD. What we need is to implement similar practices like this to the financing for development and fiscal space. I think the most fundamental problem, even before the creation of other systems, is to eliminate age-based barriers that restrict young people from already participating in existing spaces. I want to take the example of the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development. Young people under the age of 18 were not allowed on the first preparatory committee or the main conference in Seville itself. This effectively excluded a substantial portion of the world's young people from shaping the conference's outcomes. Yet, in the websites, the promotional materials, and speeches, people mentioned children and young people. But I do ask, what is the significance of that when children are not allowed to be in that room? And let me take the example of FfD Week happening here today. UN80 and budgetary constraints prevented young people from getting access to the UN HQ because we require special passes that's not the same type of passes that adults have, and we also needed passes for our chaperones. And because of financial reductions and liquidity crisis at the UN, that was not an option for me. So while I wanted to be here for FfD Week, negotiating and actually being inside the conference rooms, I can't be here because I can't have the access to these spaces. So when we examine the role of children and youth in the financing for development process and its nexus processes, I think the question we need to ask is not about what more needs to be established, what is the new things that's going to help young people succeed, but it's, first of all, having that access to existing spaces and having that meaningful voice for us to contribute. And so I think that's the main point I want to make today, that children have a space in the UN, but this space is shrinking, and this space is under great threat. Thank you.
Is still hope in many ways, in that in the past few years, I've seen a growing interest among young people to engage in this topic. Compared to, let's say, 5 years ago, most young people who engaged in this field of advocacy, of this multilateral advocacy, they did not know what FfD actually was or what the interlinked processes were. But now we have the FfD Children and Youth constituency, the major group. We have about 100 different people involving in this process across about 25 different thematic processes and other negotiations. And we even have around 13 young people here today, right now, who's engaging in FfD Week. And while I believe that the conditions right now are definitely not favorable for us, what I think is the most important is that we have this continued interest, engagement, and willingness from young people. Because when these young people enter into adulthood and move into these positions, their level of advocacy, the impact they will achieve, will continuously increase. And they will act as the model example for the next generation to follow suit, leading to the change that we want. So I think that is my source of hope. Thank you.